Good evening and welcome to the Klamath County Historical Society's September program, The Klamath Project by Moss Driscoll. George Moss Driscoll was born and raised on a sheep farm in Vermont, the youngest of 4 children. He attended Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, graduating with a degree in biology and a minor in earth system science. Between college and law school, Driscoll lived in the ghost town in Colorado Rockies, serving as the on-site interpreter. After attending his first year at the University of Oregon, he completed law school at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. After law school and passing the Colorado bar exam, Driscoll and his wife Merritt spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in East Africa, Tanzania. Upon returning home in 2012, the family settled in Klamath Falls, where Driscoll began working for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation as a water contracts specialist. His job, which often requires searching through the Bureau of Reclamation's extensive records, has given him a unique insight to the history of the Klamath Project.
So tonight I'll be speaking about Link River Dam. This is the 100-year anniversary of its completion of construction on the dam. And as the title of the presentation indicates, I think arguably construction of Link River Dam, both at the time it was done and in the century that's followed, has proven to be, frankly, one of the most controversial things that reclamation ever did here in the Klamath Basin. In terms of the agenda for this presentation, I do plan to discuss pre-dam conditions, as well as exactly how reclamation, California Oregon Power Company, became involved in construction of the dam. We have some good photos, and we'll talk a little bit about the actual construction of the dam and the effects of lake regulation in terms of water levels, both in the lake and flows downstream. And lastly, the controversy over COPCO and storage operations. With that being said, here this is a picture taken October 27th, 1906. Almost 115 years ago, showing just upstream the eventual site of Link River Dam at the head of Link River, which is the natural outlet of Upper Klamath Lake. Of note in this picture is the rapids in the middle of the river, which are created by a natural basalt reef, generally referred to as the lower reef. Also visible on the left-hand side of the photo, the west bank of the river, is the original canal constructed by Charles and Rufus Moore in the early 1890s, which was used for power and to power a flour mill and irrigation of lots and orchards in and around Klamath Falls. On the right-hand side of the screen are 2 diversions. The first of which, on the far right, is the Ankeny Canal. You can see it extending along the river. It was initially built in the 1870s for irrigating town lots in Klamath Falls, and later extended out towards the Henley area. Also, right in the middle of the photo, with that berm extending out into the river, is the recently constructed at the time diversion works of the Klamath Falls Light and Water Power Company's East Side Power Plant No. 2, which was constructed in 1905 and 1906. Before diving into the history of Link River Dam, we'll note that the history I'm discussing here, for all intents and purposes, really begins in 1905. This is a century after Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean, 60 years after the Spanish-American War, and almost 30 years after George Nurse registered the first plat for the town of Linkville. That may seem like a long time ago from our perspective, sitting here 116 years later, but we also have to recognize it's a very short time in comparison to the immense period of human history that came before and around Link River Canyon. In particular, I'm referring to the significance of the Link River and the surrounding area for the Klamath tribes. As the sign at Putnam Point indicates, Link River was the site of a busy trading post for the Klamath tribes named Ualona, which spanned both sides of the river. In this respect, it is also important to note that Link River Dam was not the first impoundment on the Link River. In 1885, prominent businessman William J. Clark noted the existence of an ancient rock dam at the head of Link River, built in a semicircle pointing downstream with a shallow channel extending some distance down the river. Clark covered the rock and surmised that it was built for fishing purposes, but also he interestingly noted that the Klamath tribes, quote, wished to confine the waters of the lake for the sake of the Tule lands, end quote. The purpose of noting this history is to both acknowledge the immense human history that my talk here doesn't address, as well as the apparent fact that the early engineers for the U.S. Reclamation Service were perhaps not the first to think of regulating water levels in a Klamath Lake. That being said, before diving into the history, it's probably helpful to describe the dam itself and be clear as to what exactly we're talking about. Link River Dam is a concrete slab and buttress structure, approximately 19 feet high off the embankment or off the foundation, and 435 feet long. It was built in 1921 by the California-Oregon Power Company, also known as COPCO for short. Altogether, the dam has 44 separate bays. The 24 bays occupying most of the dam, framed in this picture by the crane gantry along the top of the dam. Those bays are blocked with stop logs, which can be removed during high flow events. There are 6 bays on the left hand or west side of the river that discharge directly into the Link River and are generally referred to as the river gates. Oh, I'm sorry. These 2 of these gates, underneath the white box there, you can see on top of the dam, are controlled remotely by PacifiCorp from their control center outside of Vancouver, Washington. The large structure next to the river gates, to the left of the river gates, there is the fish ladder constructed by Reclamation in 2004 at a cost of approximately $4 million, which was specially designed to allow suckerfish to climb it. To the left of the fish ladder, just barely visible here, is the headworks and start of the Keno Canal, which feeds PacifiCorp's West Side power plant, visible along the trail at Link River. You can also, well, you can't see it here in this photo, but there's also a dilapidated fish ladder on the right-hand side of the dam, the easterly side of the dam, which is original to the structure. On the far right-hand side of the dam here, visible in the foreground, is the forebay to the penstock that delivers water into PacifiCorp's West Side power plant. Separate gates on the dam divert water into the east side and west side power plants. Lastly, just below the dam here, visible in the vegetation, is a concrete conduit, which comes all the way from the A Canal headworks, roughly a third of a mile upstream, and was installed in 2002. Basically, fish prevented from entering the A Canal headworks are screened out and can be discharged back into Upper Klamath Lake via a pipe that you can see from Fremont Bridge, a little concrete pier out there, or into Link River through this conduit that discharges just downstream of the dam. A few years ago, Reclamation replaced the original wooden stop logs with concrete and steel structures, but otherwise, all the concrete and metal on the dam is original to the structure and has never been replaced. Reclamation and PacifiCorp currently share in maintenance of the facility, and although PacifiCorp has operational control on a day-to-day basis. The dam is operated to regulate water levels in Upper Klamath Lake, generally between 43.3 feet above sea level and 36 feet below sea level or above sea level. I'll refer to elevations over the course of this presentation, and they're all generally in relation to Upper Klamath Lake water surface elevations. Again, we're talking about 4,100 feet above sea level and an operational range currently of about 7 feet. More realistically, 6 feet, really between 43.3 feet at the upper end and 37 feet. These next two photos are from, well, this photo is from June of 1905. And this photo was taken approximately where the marina is now located, looking south at Putnam Point and Link River Canyon in the background. Not sure about the structure in the lower right of the photo, although I'd guess it's some type of water wheel for municipal or industrial use. What is to note in this photo is the riffles visible in the water as it rounds Putnam Point. This was created by the so-called upper reef beneath the water surface there. Between the upper and lower reefs at the start of Link River, Upper Klamath Lake basically operated as a immense settling basin, collecting the drainage from an area nearly twice the size of the state of Delaware, approximately 3,800 square miles. As the lake filled, its outflow increased over the two reefs, and as snow runoff tailed off in the summertime, outflow and evaporation from the lake would cause lake levels to recede, thus reducing the amount of water that could flow over the two reefs. Keep in mind here that the flow of the reefs was influenced both by the lake's water level and the ongoing inflow to the lake. For example, in a wetter year, the outflow from the lake would be greater than in a dry year at the same relative water surface elevation. The effect of the upper and lower reefs, as well as the shallow nature of the lake itself, is plainly evident in the relatively common phenomena that occurred prior to the dam's construction, when during continuously strong northerly winds, the flow over the reefs would be effectively halted, and Link River would go effectively dry. This photo is from around 1908, as we understand, as well as the following one. When Link River was blown dry, it was common for fish, particularly suckers and bullheads, to be stranded in the remaining pools where they could easily be caught. This picture is from the lower end of Link River and was taken in 1911. The last time Link River went dry is believed to be July 1918, a year before the Crib Dam was constructed by Copco at the lower reef, initiating construction of the dam. This photo is from late 1906 and is looking at the north, looking to the north and at the lower end of Link River, just on the far left. You can see the county bridge crossing the lower end of Link River there. One of the reasons we know about lake and river conditions prior to construction of Link River Dam is thanks to the U.S. Geological Survey, of which the Bureau of Reclamation was originally part of. J.H. Lewis, who was an engineer for the Geological Survey, established a gauge on the county bridge at the bottom of Link River in mid-May 1904. The gauge was initially maintained by George Woodbury at the rate of $3 a month. Lewis also installed a staff gauge that same month on Upper Klamath Lake in Pelican Bay. And in 1905, that gauge was moved to Buena Vista Landing at the south end of the lake before being relocated again to the head of Link River in 1919. In terms of pre-dam conditions, what the early hydrologic record indicates is that in the 15 years of water measurement prior to construction of Link River Dam, the water surface elevation on the lake generally ranged between 4,140 and 4,142 feet above sea level, climbing as high as 4,143 during the spring and early summer and wetter years. Just as a reminder, the dam can now regulate water levels between generally 4137 and 4143, so 3 feet lower than the period observed prior to the dam. And we'll return to this discussion a little bit later, but first, I thought we'd talk about and explain just exactly who was involved and how the dam came to be in the first place. This is a photo from August of 1921, shortly before the dam was completed, showing a group of officials from COPCO and the Department of Interior and the Reclamation Service. Notable in this photo is J.C. Thompson, Secretary of COPCO. Second from the far left, to the right of him, with his hat pulled down over his eyes, is A.P. Davis, the then Director of the Reclamation Service. In the middle of the group, fifth from the left, appearing to be holding a stopwatch or a pocket watch, is Albert Fall, the then Secretary of the Interior. In the way background there, between the second and third people on the right, is Paul McKee, who was Vice President of COPCO at the time. This group is standing on the original headworks of the Keno Dam, Keno Canal, just downstream of Link River Dam. In general, Reclamation had envisioned a dam at the head of Link River since inception of the project in 1905. In connection with the project, both Congress and the Oregon General Assembly authorized the Secretary of the Interior to lower water levels in Upper Klamath Lake in connection with an irrigation project under the National Reclamation Act. Being part of an interstate navigable waterway, it took an act of Congress, of course, to authorize reclamation to interfere and potentially eliminate navigation on the lake. Water from Upper Klamath Lake was envisioned by the Reclamation Service to be the principal source of water for the approximately 200,000 acres of reclaimed lands in Oregon and California that were to be served by the Klamath Project. Half of this land to be reclaimed was, at the time of the project's inception, inundated, of course, by Tule Lake and Lower Klamath Lake. In 1913, Reclamation was studying the matter of storage and regulation on Upper Klamath Lake and believed at that time that the lake could be regulated between 4142 and basically 4140 and meet all the irrigation and power needs of the project without flooding additional lands or materially interfering with navigation. Questions at the time, however, still remained about the size of the project and the amount of water that would be needed to irrigate these lands. In late 1915, a board of engineers of the Reclamation Service determined that even with irrigation power needs of the Klamath Project, as well as the potential demands associated with the Indian Irrigation Project, as it was called, on the Klamath Reservation, it would not be necessary to raise water levels in the lake above the normal high water level of approximately 43.3 feet. Reclamation was not, however, the only entity that was making plans for water from Upper Klamath Lake. In 1911, a power conglomerate was being formed by some of the most prominent businessmen in Southern Oregon and Northern California. James and Jesse Churchill, the sons of one of Siskiyou County's foremost pioneers, began acquiring several smaller power companies in the region, including the Klamath Falls Light and Water Company, which was then owned by the Moore brothers. Following reorganization of this entity into the Siskiyou Electric Power and Light Company, the Churchills purchased the Rogue River Electric Company for $3.3 million in 1911. The Rogue River Electric Company had been formed by Colonel Frank Ray and his brother C.R. Ray, who constructed Gold Ray Dam on the Rogue River in 1902, in part to power the mines they owned in and around Ashland. Colonel Ray was a prominent Wall Street financier who served as chairman of the Western Power Company and vice president of the American Tobacco Company, and resided at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. In late 1911, a group of investors led by Churchill and the Ray brothers formed the California-Oregon Power Company, COPCO. In early 1912, the company acquired Siskiyou Electric Power and Light and Rogue River Electric, as well as 23 other regional power companies for $10 million, which is roughly equivalent to over $250 million in today's dollars. By then, COPCO had already initiated construction on a large dam on the Klamath River, eventually to be known as COPCO 1, intended to be the principal power source for the new company. Needless to say, as the title here to this newspaper clipping indicates, in the middle of the progressive area, this San Francisco-based company with all these mysterious investors was viewed with great reservation by the public. In the middle of all this, James Churchill visited Klamath Falls in July 1912, making a reconnaissance trip around Upper Klamath Lake. Churchill characterized this trip as almost purely a pleasure trip. You have to think that the public was aware that something was afoot. In today's equivalent, this would be like Ted Turner driving around your ranch, saying he was just on a sightseeing trip. COPCO's interest eventually turned to the Keno and Ankeny canals, having already acquired the power plant served by these facilities. In 1916, when Secretary of the Interior Franklin Lane became personally involved in the matter, the discussions with COPCO over leasing the two canals merged into the concept of the power company constructing a dam on behalf of the United States at the head of Link River. These discussions eventually led to a 1917 contract between COPCO and the United States, whereby COPCO agreed to construct the dam and transfer it to the United States in exchange for the right to use water from Upper Klamath Lake, surplus to the needs of the Klamath project, for use in generating power at COPCO 1 and the other plants the company envisioned building on the Klamath River. There were several years of delay before work actually started, but in the summer of 1920, COPCO finalized their plans for Link River Dam and began construction with a crew of approximately 125 laborers. Costs at the time were about $1,000 a day, which most of that, really 4/5 of that was the material costs. They were spending about $200 a day in labor for that crew of 125 people. One of the neat things about this project is some of the original engineering drawings that are associated with it. These are large format drawings, generally 4 by 3 feet in size. And here's an example of one. This is just showing the head gates, the river gates on the dam, and you can see the incredible detail and drawing that the COPCO's engineers employed in putting together the designs and specifications for the dam. These drawings are still housed at the Klamath Basin Area Office, although set to soon be sent to the Federal Record Center in outside of Denver, Colorado. And I think when that occurs, they'll probably largely never see the light of day again. So an interesting thing that we have here at the local area office. Work on the dam started with initially a coffer dam that was used to route water around the site, followed by the bulkhead you see here, used to dewater what would eventually be the foundation for the dam. This is looking at the east abutment, the tunnel for the east abutment, and you can see the beginning of the foundation here on the site. In late August of 1920, there were several petitions, including by the governor of Oregon and the senator from the state, one of the senators from the state at the time, that petitioned for the Secretary of the Interior to halt this construction on the alleged grounds that it would interfere with the state's rights and the development of irrigation in Oregon. The Secretary of the Interior agreed, and construction was halted on August 31st, 1920. And the work crew was disbanded by COPCO, and in the months thereafter, COPCO's financing for the project was actually pulled by its investors, and for a period, there was some question as to whether or not COPCO would at all have the resources to complete the work. There were hearings in both Klamath Falls and in DC on this matter, and whether or not to invalidate the contract, the 1917 contract, or conversely allow the power company to proceed with construction. There were a lot of reasons for the fear and suspicion over the power company, besides just the general ones about monopolies during this period. But they primarily stemmed from two groups. The American Legion here in Klamath Falls, which was led by an attorney, a local attorney, J.H. Carnahan. They opposed construction of the dam on the grounds that it would presumably flood or keep flooded lands, marshlands surrounding the lake, Upper Klamath Lake, that could be reclaimed and homesteaded by soldiers fallen in the war, World War I. They estimated it was approximately 10,000 acres would be lost due to construction of the dam. The Senator Snow and Governor Chamberlain's opposition to the dam was based on the argument that it allowed the power company to control basically the water in Upper Klamath Lake for power and irrigation purposes, generally in the state of California. And so they looked at it as interfering with the state of Oregon's interest in developing irrigation out of the Klamath River. Ultimately, those hearings in Klamath Falls and DC led to an amendment of the contract that was intended to explicitly make clear that all the lands potentially within the entire Klamath project, as reclamation would eventually extend the project to, which at that time was still uncertain, and included areas like Butte Valley and potentially other areas, including in the Shasta Valley, that those interests would be given foremost preference over power, over irrigation. I apologize, I seem to be losing power here, which would be problematic. Hold on 1 second. I think that does it. Apologies. So following the amendments to the contract, construction was actually allowed to proceed. In the following summer, in 1921, COPCO began work early and made significant progress that year in completing the dam. These next photos are just a series of pictures taken during construction of the dam. Here in this photo, you're looking to the east abutment of the dam, and you can see the construction slowly making progress from east to west. Here's that westerly abutment, still under work, and you can see the amount of excavation of the channel and in and around the dam, as well as the large debris piles that were formed as part of the excavation for the site. Here at the end of August, you can see that the work on the dam is approaching completion there on the outlet works, and only a few months later, by the end of October, the dam is essentially complete. There was work to continue to clean up the site, as you can see here on the downstream end of it, as well as to address the effects of the reefs. In order to get water to the dam, it was necessary to excavate both the upper and lower reefs. And here in this picture from late 1921, you can see the dam that had been created around the site, the cofferdam that had been created around the site to dewater the upper reef at Putnam Point and excavate it down approximately 7 feet, as I recall. So it was quite an undertaking to dewater these areas and actually get in there and remove material necessary to allow for, as we saw earlier, water levels to potentially be lowered below their historical levels. Here's the dam shortly after its completion in 1922, and you can see the site has largely been restored, at least in the river itself. There was continuing work, you can see here from this photo in 1924, that they were still doing work, particularly on at this point, the Ankeny and Keno canals, and connecting those to the dam from their original headworks. Here's again a picture of the upper reef, dewatered with the cofferdam in the background. And you can see this is looking north towards Shippington and Buena Vista Landing at the time. You can see the water moving around the site, as well as just how deep this excavation was. The original reef there at the upper reef, which is really the controlling elevation on the lake, the top of that reef reached 4,137 feet. So, even at the lowest water levels that naturally occurred in the lake, there would still be approximately 3 feet of water flowing over even the highest point on that reef. Here's a good depiction of exactly that excavation, both on the upper reef at Putnam Point there on the left-hand side of the photo, as well as the lower reef. On the lower reef, 2 channels were dredged that lead to the dam, the east and west abutment of the dam, as well as the area immediately in front of the dam. So returning to the matter of the dam's effect on the lake and on river flows, we come back to this picture, which again shows 15 years of records prior to the dam's construction, which indicate that generally water levels fluctuated between approximately 4140 and 4142, climbing higher in wetter years, even above 4143, and occasionally below 4140 in drier years. It's worth noting here that although diversions began to the Klamath project in 1907, the area that was irrigated through this period was generally less than 30,000 acres, and diversions during that time for the first decade were approximately 20,000 acre feet or less. Even by 1918, there were only about 80,000 acre feet, which is only which is roughly a foot of elevation on the lake. I think one point to note is the high of record here on this chart, which indicates that the lake's water surface elevation reached 4145 in 1904 in the spring. It's worth noting that water levels in the lake at that time, as at the end of May, when the gate was established at Pelican Bay, were 4143.7. So already above, at that time, late May, already above their normal high. And the outflow in Link River at the time was over 9,000 cubic feet per second. Flows in the Link River remained over 7,000 cubic feet per second that summer into mid-June. So really high elevated levels, basically as high as we ever see them today. So there is good evidence to support this assumed record high. I think the evidence supports that conclusion that the lake reached potentially 41 and 45 in extremely wet periods. That being said, it's important to note that the 15 years before construction of Link River Dam were unquestionably a wetter period compared to the century since. As you can see from this interesting table, which reflects that point. In this table, the months and years marked in red exceeded the mean between 1904 and 1942. And the months and years in blue were below average. So between 1904 and 1918, the average annual inflow to Upper Klamath Lake was over 1.6 million acre feet, and never less than 1 million acre feet. Compare that to the post-dam period, and particularly the period from 1928 to 1937, and you see how wet that early period was. During that period of drought in the late 20s and 30s, inflows were basically less than 1 million feet annually. So arguably, comparing lake levels before the dam versus after the dam is not an accurate representation of the dam's true effects on hydrology. I think a better representation of the effects of the dam on lake levels is shown in this chart, prepared by one of Reclamation's engineers in 1933, which attempts to show the difference between actual lake levels at the time, indicated by the solid line there, versus those that would have been anticipated to occur had the dam not been built, which are shown in the dashed line. Here in this graph, on the far left-hand side, 1926 and 1927 are good examples of the variation that occurred post-dam. 1926 was a very dry year, followed by an average year in 1927. And as you can see in the second half of 1926, rather than lake bottoming out just under 4140, lake regulation allowed the water level to be dropped to 4137. But you notice by the following spring, by limiting releases from the lake, the water surface elevation was higher than it would have naturally been expected to be. Also note here is the change in the timing of high and low levels, lake levels. Pre-dam, the lake would often peak in February, March, or April. And after the dam, that peak often occurred later in the spring, like May, even June. Conversely, before the dam, water surface elevations would generally reach their lowest point in the midsummer, as early as July. But following the dam, the low was generally pushed into the fall, even early winter period. Here's another way to show that change. Here's annual hydrographs showing more than 20 years of regulated lake levels. As you can see, not only does the water surface elevation at times go higher and lower than it did pre-dam, but the magnitude of change in the annual hydrograph is greater after construction of the dam. As noted earlier, and I'll conclude with just a few minutes to speak on the controversy that stemmed from construction of the dam. It did not, it was not abated with completion of the dam and initiation of regulation on Upper Klamath Lake. This is a cartoon from a local paper from 1924. And by that time, a large faction, or a strong faction within Klamath Irrigation District, had come out in opposition of the dam and continued operation of it by COPCO. The main driver behind this push was a gentleman named Ray Bradbury, and he contended that that reclamation had essentially given favor to the power company and power development over the irrigation scheme of the project. Bradbury believed that power should be developed for the project and be used to pay off the construction costs across all the lands served by the project. He also felt that that Oregon was hurt by the contract and by the dam, based upon inundation of lands that the state could have sold and levied taxes upon. There was a push in Congress, and for several years there were bills introduced to allow to authorize the irrigation district for the state of Oregon to sue the United States to invalidate the 1917 contract. And despite quite a lot of support for some of these bills, there was never any action taken by either the irrigation district or the state of Oregon to invalidate the contract or have COPCO's operation of the dam eliminated. Ultimately, those factions in KID largely dissipated. There was a power shift in effect in the district, and the group of directors that Bradbury led was basically pushed out from running the district, and the district ultimately moved in other directions in terms of the main issues it was trying to address. So this presentation could go on longer and talk about the controversies surrounding the power company and power development and the use of Upper Klamath Lake in the 1950s, when the hydroelectric project was licensed before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And of course, we could bring this controversy into the modern day in terms of the issues and questions over regulation of lake levels in Upper Klamath Lake and flows in the Klamath River and the needs of endangered species, particularly fish in the lake and the river. So even 100 years later, I think it's fair to say that the controversy has not stemmed around Link River Dam and the interest of the public in the regulation of the lake, including by all stakeholders, ranging from irrigators on the project to tribal interests. So that being said, I apologize I ran over, but if there are questions at this time, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Boss, if you stop sharing, we'll be able to see more of the people that are here tonight, see if they want to ask questions.
To everyone, how do I do this?
Is there any of the reef left?
Yeah, good question. Well, one thing you can see from Putnam Point is a spit of land out right there in the middle of the channel, which has a number of boards, as I recall, actually sticking up out of it. Part of the cofferdam, the power company had quite a difficult task in removing the cofferdam at Putnam Point, and part of that original cofferdam is still there. But in terms of the obstruction that the reefs created, it's really largely been eliminated, and control has been transferred to the dam. But to your question, it was only a notch essentially that was excavated in the reefs. So particularly at Putnam Point, yes, there's still a significant portion of the reef that is there. The lower reef as well is visible too. You can see the channels that go on both sides of the dam, but you can also see the reef in the middle that remains. Yeah, good question.
Is electric power still being generated there?
No, as part of PacifiCorp's application for relicensing in 2004, after the expiration of the original 50-year FERC license for the project, PacifiCorp proposed to decommission the east side and west side plants, primarily due to the issues associated with fish getting into those canals and the potential costs that it would take to screen them off. So power generation is not occurring through the east and west side.
Is this a real Zoom?
Although apparently COPCO fires them up, PacifiCorp fires them up every once in a while to keep them operational.
Most did too.
They're still licensed. They're still part of the federal project, but they're generally operable.
Let's see. Let's see. Up here should be. Oh, you better get your camera. Up here. This is where I tap. Chat. So it should say.
Todd Wilkins.
Down here.
Todd Wilkins, you're still
I did it
unmuted and your conversation is going to all of us. Todd Wilkins, did you hear me? Your conversation is going out to everybody because you're still unmuted.
Oh.
Are they asking you to?
Are
Moss,
there any other questions I can answer?
Moss, this is Bill Lewis. Question is, when was the Fremont Bridge built in the scheme of all this, and when was the A Canal built?
Well, I apologize. I don't know the answer to the first question, although I do know that, and I think it was evident in one of the pictures that I showed, that generally the main means of crossing to the west side of Link River and getting to the west side of Upper Klamath Lake was at the county bridge at the bottom of Link River, and then there was a road that went up the west side of the river along the Keno Canal. Apparently, it was a very hard road to maintain and a pretty treacherous road. Certainly, if you had any issues in terms of going off the path. So I don't know when Fremont Bridge was constructed, but for a period of time, you either went up that road on the west side of the river, or there was a ferry that operated to take people across. As far as the A Canal Headworks, construction on that started in 1906, including the tunnel underneath the city of Klamath Falls, and was completed in the midsummer of 1907. And the first irrigation deliveries occurred in early July, as I recall, 1907. So it's been inoperable, been in operation for more than a decade prior to the dam's construction.
Thank you.
Is it possible to visit the dam now?
Well, there is public access both to the dam site, both on Link River Trail, as well as the public can walk on the west side down to the dam site. There is fencing and security that prevents access to the dam itself. Although I understand, that fencing and that security didn't always exist, and it was not an uncommon thing for the general public to go out on that dam, at least for some period of time. I'm not sure exactly when that ended, but I've certainly heard that as well.
You have any comments in regard to?
Are you muted?
I'm unmuted. Do you have any comments in regard to the future and what we're facing, which is obviously extraordinarily complex?
Well, the controversy that I think that reclamation created for itself by construction of Link River Dam was the ability to determine what the flow is in the Klamath River at the California-Oregon border. So, pre-dam, the water would just naturally spill out. A portion of it would go into Lower Klamath, and then a portion of it would go down the river past Keno, and ultimately to the state of California. The creation of the dam allowed reclamation and COPCO for the first basically 80 years to determine what that flow was. And that question of how much water is to flow in from California into Oregon is, of course, a legal question, generally governed by water law. And I think that's, in terms of looking to the future, where the key issue lies. It's that control that reclamation now has, and that it exercises, to be clear, in determining what those flows are. So I suspect as long as you have a federal agency that is making that determination, I think controversy is likely to continue.
The removal of the dams downstream, would that basically help things, in your opinion?
We are, the states of Oregon and California and us, the ratepayers, have all funded essentially removal of the 4 hydroelectric dams constructed by COPCO, now owned by PacifiCorp. And that dam removal proceedings are moving forward before FERC. They haven't been approved yet, but there's a lot of resources and support for that effort. There's also some opposition. The purpose of dam removal is reintroduction. The stated purpose of dam removal in the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement is to return habitat that salmon and other anadromous fish historically inhabited. I didn't include it here, but we do have pictures, from the 1890s of people holding, Chinook salmon up after catching them on Link River. So while there were many impediments to fish coming up the Klamath River, both natural and man-made, there was a point when there were salmon that particularly Chinook that came this far out. That potential will be restored for those fish, following dam removal. And presumably 420 miles of stream habitat will be restored to them that they're currently blocked from. So on paper, that should help, particularly anadromous fish, in terms of having additional habitat and also being able to basically escape some of the disease and water quality issues that are plague the lower Klamath River main stem. So it presumably, if all the experts are right, should help with restoration of salmonid species in the basin. Although this is one of the largest, it is in fact the largest dam removal project ever undertaken in the United States. And when you're doing something for the first time, obviously there's going to be a learning curve. So we will see. But with respect to, I think, the larger question and reclamation and the controversy that exists, Link River Dam will then be the only dam on the Klamath River outside of Keno, which is basically a re-regulating dam that controls flows on the Klamath River. So in terms of where the focus will be on this issue of flows in the Klamath River, it'll be all the more squarely on reclamation following dam removal. So no, I don't anticipate the controversy to abate. Good question. Are there any others?
We understand that this session was recorded. A terrific session, lots of details. Thank you very much. Is there any chance it's going to be on YouTube where people can access it from a broader spectrum than just those of us that heard it tonight?
Yes, I have been recording the session tonight with software other than Zoom, and I will make it into MP4. It'll be accessible from the Historical Society website, or you can search for it on YouTube. And it will be Driscoll Moss and the Klamath Project.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Moss. And I'd like to thank my wife, who was the engineer that kept all the background noise down this evening. And thank you very much. Very interesting program. Wonderful pictures. And thank you very much.
I'll add my thanks to that too. I certainly enjoyed the program.
Yeah, thank you all very much, and feel free to reach out and contact me if you're at all interested on any. If you have any further questions or interested in any further history here, happy to discuss this topic and point you to any resources I can.
Well, thank you again. And if there's no more comments, we will end the meeting. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for watching this presentation by the Klamath County Historical Society.